Okay, before we get started, I just want to make a quick statement. At this time, we're going to have a presentation of fire planners, followed by an explanation of changes that the council has made to the first draft of the plan. Council members will have additional questions, followed by the public hearings, comments, and questions. Hopefully our explanation of the process will clear up many of the public's concerns. So at this time, I'll turn it over for the presentation of the potential amendments to the Spring Street redevelopment plan.
Thank you, council members. For the record, my name is Phil Abramson, Principal of Topology, NJ LLC, and Morristown Planning Division. So first of all, just thank you so much. I know you've already had one hearing tonight. Thank you so much for your energy and time being here, and for the public as well. I also just want to thank you for all your feedback and comments to make the document that you have in front of you and the plan that we're going to discuss tonight that much better. It honestly would not be as good without your input. So I do really appreciate all your collaboration in the past 3 weeks to help really inform this. And I think, you know, if I lived here, I would be very proud of the way that you handled this process. So, and I am, even though I am. Okay. So just going through here, what we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background. The amendment overview, the redevelopment plan, you have a document in front of you tonight, it's an ordinance. I'm going to talk a little bit about that document, and then you will have your own two of your own traffic engineers to go through the traffic report that they've come up with. They've done a third-party independent review of the data prepared by the redeveloper, which was based originally on the town's data. They're going to get into that and talk all about their findings and recommendations. And then I'm going to jump back in and just talk about the process and kind of frame this and provide a little context into exactly where we are right now, and that this is the first of many, many, many steps before a shovel ever hits the ground. So just to provide some background, and these are things that I've said before, but for those who haven't been to prior meetings on this, this is the outline of the Spring Street redevelopment area. The redevelopment area was designated in 2004 originally, that's 15 years ago. And when I say designated, I mean that this town, your predecessors in the governing body, determined that this area is in need of redevelopment, that it met certain criteria under a state statute that said that the municipality can now take extraordinary steps to reverse the conditions on these properties. This was 15 years ago. This was not my choice. It was not your choice. This is a condition that existed and findings that existed in 2004. As I said, 2004 to 2008. The 2008 was a minor modification to the boundaries of that designation, which had to do with a portion of the nursing home, which no longer, turns out, I think will be needed, and we're not including it part of this. So, but that's why it says 2004 to 2008, but the original bulk of the designation occurred in 2004. In December 2008, the Spring Street redevelopment plan was adopted. It is now ordinance. It is now the effective zoning for this area. I will explain what that means and what that zoning is. So it's important for everybody to keep in mind about, you know, it's not necessarily the existing conditions or nothing, or this or the universe of choices and the universe of the future of this project is partially governed by actions that were taken 11 years ago by your predecessors in adopting that ordinance. In 2014, the town adopted its own master plan, the planning board, and independently recommended that this plan really does need to be modified. That the thinking in 2008, in the urban planning world, it was frankly a different time. It was a different era of urban planning. I know that sounds crazy, 11 years, but this resurgence that we've seen throughout the state, throughout this country, in cities, has really not been going on that long. And the 2008 plan reflects a different view of Morristown, a more suburban highway view of Morristown, the way that this town was developed for decades, for probably 20 years, with front yard parking and that. So there is some of that in that 2008 plan. The 2014 plan said we need to do better. We need to make this reflect modern conditions and our modern sort of aspirations. 2016, one of the sites were approved. It was the old gas station, if you could call it that, or repair shop, just under the shadow of Headquarters Plaza at the corner of Water Street and Spring Street. So I say that because that project was also governed under the Spring Street redevelopment plan. This was that redevelopment plan that was adopted by your predecessors 11 years ago. It included anywhere between 275 and 325 units. It includes 55 to 65,000 square feet of retail. It includes 55 to 65,000 square feet of office and 125 to 175 room hotel. You can see here, this here is an 8-story building that is approved with front yard parking. 4 stories, 6-story parking garage. The remainder I don't have heights on here, but we heard testimony from 2 or 3 meetings ago from the author of this plan, Paul Phillips. And he said, and he worked for the town at the time and authored the plan for the town. And he said, this was a weird, and let's all not forget, this was a weird time. You know, I was in school at this time and I couldn't find a job at this time and nobody really knew where the world was going at this time. This was the very start of the recession when this plan was adopted. And they said, we threw everything at the wall because we didn't know what was going to work. And that's what really the policy basis of this plan was let's see if we can make something happen for Morristown here. And that's what we have today. This is the zoning today. 8 stories next to Transit Village, we call it Highlands, at Morristown Station. 6-story parking in the back, 4 in parts of the front. In the Spring Street plan, again, this was just an illustrative sketch. So this is Spring Street here, Morris Street, Wilmot. I never even noticed that the Wilmot deck is right there on lot 10 back 5 years ago. So this talked about a central court, about creating a street wall, about creating a kind of hidden parking. So the street is more of a pedestrian-friendly street, has more of a street wall, more of an urban fabric, rather than a highway-style front yard parking fabric. This is the site as it exists today. We have the Midtown Shopping Center, single story, used to be at least on this part, an A&P, I'm told, and otherwise several individual retailers. The Spring Hills Nursing Home sits up here in the back, and then you have people call it Transit Village or Highlands at Morristown Station in the front, and then several hundred spaces of parking in the front. So, what has been our process to date? We've had at least 3 of these meetings. June 13th, the first presentation to you as the redevelopment entity. On June 13th, on June 27th, we had a community meeting up in the Senior Center. On August 13th, there was a second presentation to the redevelopment entity. So the types of things that we heard and the types of things that we were able to accomplish based on advocating for the public based on their comments, a reduction in height in the taller building from 8 stories to 7 stories. We enhanced the architectural standards. The building you see here is conceptual. It does not represent the final design. It is a location. It is a massing. The architecture will be, and the redevelopment plan anticipates that it will be refined and made to be more textured and articulated. It required, and we require now, but much more robust traffic analysis, and more robust traffic analysis has already occurred as a result. Increased bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, and the provision for short-term parking for customers, retail customers. So what is this redevelopment plan amendment ordinance that you have in front of you? What is it? What does it do? What does it contain? So first, geographic boundaries. It includes, I don't know exactly how many parcels offhand right now, but this is the general area of their lots 2 through 15, basically, in this entire block. So everything on basically both sides of Spring Place. It includes the plumbing supply building. It does not include the electrical supply building. It includes Spring Place in its totality as a right-of-way. It includes all the homes on that one side of Spring Place. It includes the shopping center. It includes the 7-Eleven, and it includes the 2 buildings here. One on the corner contains Fatty's restaurant. The other one contains a nail salon on the first floor. Those buildings are included because they're necessary to build the right-of-way for the roundabout. As I just said, the lighter teal color is where development would occur, and that the blue is where the right-of-way expansion would happen if necessary. So this is the basic, site plan, if you will. And some of the things I was asked to hit on as part of this presentation by council members because they've gotten questions from their own constituents. And I'll start with the first one, which was requested about retaining walls. And people have asked, how tall would the retaining walls be? Where would they be? Because there's a big wall down the street, and in a hill town, which Morristown sort of is, a lot of topography here, we've dealt with retaining walls in the past. So there is, the tallest retaining wall here would be to basically hold the grade and where Spring Place comes and meets and becomes a right angle, controlled signalized intersection right here. So there is a retaining wall back here that comes up to about 8 feet to hold that slope back. It is not up on the street. It is to hold the slope that exists and it's going in this direction, downhill in that direction. There is a parking structure proposed back here. The maximum height of that structure is 65 feet. There's the first, what we call the east building in the plan, 6 stories, but the footprint is 25,000 feet. The west building, we call it in the plan, 7 stories and 40,000 feet. The max coverage, just as kind of zoning talk, how much of the site the buildings can cover, 70%, which is consistent with the current zoning in the downtown, and the max improvement coverage, meaning anything that's not grass or vegetation, so any hardscape asphalt is, including buildings, 95%, which is consistent with the zoning in the downtown. The public spaces, the real and really important stuff. There are kind of 3 or 4, depending on how you look at it, main pieces of public space here that will contribute to the overall kind of pedestrian realm and experience in the town. These have not been designed, so the things that you see here are conceptual. There are several design standards, pages of design standards in the redevelopment plan. There's a process laid out in the redevelopment plan that involves review by the planning board. But basically, there is a 10,000-foot plaza here. When I came and presented to you once before, that was like 8,300 feet. So that has grown in some ways because this right-of-way, or the roundabout, has changed its geometry in order to meet certain demands of our traffic engineers. So where we've lost in here, this plaza has been cut away to make room for the roundabout. It picked up space in through here, so I think that's important to note. And this one's 2,500 feet. And then the Mara Street Promenade, which I'll show you some images and dimensions of what that streetscape will be. It's unique. I don't know many other places that have something like this. I can't really point to say, oh, think about that location. But it's a double LA of trees. Like if you think about Sinatra Boulevard in Hoboken, we're not in Hoboken right now. But it is a similar type of promenade that they have there along the waterfront there. And then this drop-off court, another place which will be programmed for open space, 8,000 feet. And then finally, in discussions with council members, they had asked, can we do better, can we do more? And we included in the redevelopment plan that any space in this corner of buildings right here, it's not shown on here, that's not being used for right-of-way because those two, remember I said those 2 buildings were being taken for street construction? The remainder there will also be used for green space and public space. So sort of this whole area will be flanked by public space, and if you look online at the great roundabouts of the world, they usually are. The great urban roundabouts throughout the world are flanked by good public spaces. This is a conceptual rendering of the promenade. There's a lot going on here. And I was just asked to make sure that everybody kind of understood how the space is being used, how the space is being differentiated and broken down. So I'm going to go from the street side toward the building, but here you have a typical street tree row, landscape buffer, tree lawns. I think we are including FlexiPay as one of the requirements. We put a standard in here because we talked about the overall width of this thing, but to make sure that at least 10 feet is unobstructed by tree wells, by light posts, by furniture, seating, anything of that nature. 10 feet is a generous pedestrian path. It's 4 or 5 people could walk arm in arm, again, next to each other. That's sort of how you like to think about it. You know, a group of 3 can walk against a group of 3. So I think 10 foot is a good, generous size for circulation purposes only, dedicated circulation. Then there's another row of trees, a double row. And there's some seating and furniture in here. Stormwater, green infrastructure would be incorporated in through this LA area. And then there's a more activated open space where maybe retailers would put out, you know, shirts for sale, or there would be outdoor dining and cafe tables and things of that nature. Design standards, we have required now as part of this that this building comes up 6 stories, and then there's a 7th story. That 7th story is stepped back. How many feet? 20 feet. As is the 6th story on this building, stepped back 20 feet. We're requiring that the top floor be differentiated in its design to make it feel lighter than the top. And there's other things being controlled as part of the design standards. There's arcades and overhangs in here, which are going to create these somewhat enclosed defensible spaces, which in urban design, we've come to understand that people like those quasi-enclosed spaces that they can feel like are part of their own. And building articulation. So I'm going to give it over to our traffic engineers in a moment. I just wanted to kind of talk about how this plan, how this process with traffic has unfolded, because it has evolved. This is one of the more complex, or if not the most complex thing that we've done as an administration, as a governing body, as Morristown redevelopment, as long as I've been involved, in terms of at least the infrastructure and traffic part of this. So we've had to create somewhat of a framework or a doctrine. How do we deal with this? Because we're dealing with land uses, we're dealing with architecture, we're dealing with bicycles and pedestrians and cars and all of this. So how do we look at it all together? How do we break it down into bite-sized chunks to make it so we can understand it and so we can control each of these in a phased way and take the right steps and bring everybody along at that time. So I'm looking at it in this 3-phase way. And it's consistent with the way that the statute looks at redevelopment happening. So the first is the redevelopment plan. That's this document, this process. We have now done a very, very comprehensive review. Both the 2 traffic engineers that you've heard from already from the developer and our 2 traffic engineers as a third-party independent review have looked at the overall corridor, basically from Speedwell Spring all the way to 287, from Morris and the Green all the way to 287. So this like wishbone corridor that is some of the busiest roads in this town, right? We looked at all those intersections and how they would be impacted in the final build condition of this project. We're here to share the results of that with you. So you will know that this land use as a use, with that roundabout as a mitigation measure, what the outcomes of that are. There are going to be there's 2 movements that were identified in that are going to be challenged by the change to the overall network. Those need to be addressed more specifically. They need to be designed. We need to have a conversation as a community about trade-offs. These are intersections which are already not functioning. There are problems, there are pre-existing problems that we have, and that we need to talk about some of the choices about how they get resolved. That will happen as part of the redeveloper agreement, as will all the funding, all the scheduling, all the logistics of implementation of that traffic. So that's the second step. And then the third step, we had previously talked about, and I know it's like inside baseball, but I'll just say it since everybody's here, is that we talked about the planning board originally doing most of, a good chunk of that traffic study. now the planning board and the site plan process will be really limited to making certain choices and decisions about trade-offs between pedestrians and automobile circulation. These are very complicated and detail-oriented. They go to the angle of the curb ramps. They go to what is the treatment of the sidewalk. These are not things that are properly kind of handled by city councils or town councils. These are planning board site plan issues. And we've, in the redevelopment plan, and if you choose to move this ahead, the ordinance that you introduce empowers the planning board to make a limited scope of decisions about the design of the roundabout and the design of the streetscape in that context, but in the framework that you create here and now as part of this ordinance. So I just wanted to be clear about what this is and what we're doing, what the future steps would look like, the kinds of questions that we can't answer tonight, like who's paying for this and what happens first and what happens second and what's the detour route and all of that kind of stuff. There are provisions for all of those things in this plan. It's a very well thought through plan. I'm proud of it. I think everybody worked together, and we should all be. So I just wanted to. That's what I want to say about traffic is how the logistics and framework play out. But otherwise, I'm going to hand it now to Brian Proska of Transportation, Traffic Planning and Design, and Lou Lucio of Sam Schwartz Engineering, who have worked together to look at this in a very
Morristown.